Hey everyone, it's Kirsten and I'm so glad you've joined me for today's video. I want to jump right into it. As you can tell from the title, we are going to be talking about brainwashing in ballet and also cultural conditioning. I want to break down these two things so that especially if you've been dancing for many years, or if you've grown up dancing, or it could even be if you just started dancing, I want you to be aware of how some certain aspects of ballet culture can really influence us to have destructive beliefs, viewpoints, behaviors, or thoughts towards ourselves. So today I'm going to be breaking down what is brainwashing, what is cultural conditioning, how do they show up within ballet culture, and what can we do to start shifting and loosening up these mentalities that might have affected us negatively for a long time. And since I always like to have a little positive note to all my videos, especially the ones where I'm talking about some tough stuff, I will be rounding out this discussion with some ways that you might have been conditioned in a way that's actually quite positive and productive for you, because not all conditioning is bad. I'm going to leave you hopefully feeling like you can change the destructive mentalities that you might have adopted over the years, but also I want you to be able to rest in the fact that the mentality that you might have adopted over your years as a dancer isn't all bad, it's not all negative, and in fact, being a dancer could definitely serve you in the long run. Before I dive straight into the main content of this video, as promised, I said I was going to announce the official launch date of the Come Back Stronger course. Now, if you don't know what the Come Back Stronger course is, it's an online program I have specifically developed for injured dancers to walk them through the recovery process and help them overcome the main challenges, questions, and confusions of the recovery process so they can come back stronger physically and mentally. This is so significant for me because 2 years ago, I was in a horrible place in life, struggling so much with a knee injury, and this course basically includes everything I wish I knew when I was going through my injury. The course also provides you with an online community of dancers going through the same thing so that we solve that problem of feeling completely alone and isolated and like no one understands us. So I'm really excited to launch this to the public. If you guys want to learn more about the Come Back Stronger course, there's a link below to www.comebackstrongercourse.com. That's where you can learn all about the course content, what the 5 modules include, and how it will absolutely make a huge life-changing difference in your recovery process if you are injured right now. But the reason I mentioned this, of course, is to announce the launch date. It will be November 13th. I'm so excited about this. And to express my appreciation for you guys supporting the launch of this course, I have developed a free PDF guide that includes 5 common mistakes that many dancers make in the recovery process that slows their recovery down. Go down to the link in the description box. You'll be able to click on the link, enter your email address, and I will send you the free guide right to your email inbox. Now, I also want to mention that when you enter your email address to get this free guide, you will be entered to receive a notification and an exclusive bonus and discount code for the Come Back Stronger course. Now, this will only be for my email community. You will not only get news of an early access promotion, but you will also receive an exclusive discount code. So there are only 100 spots open for this early enrollment promotional period. So you're going to want to jump on that. You're going to want to be a part of the email list so you don't miss out on your chance to be one of the 100 dancers that will get early access to this content at a discount. So yeah, let's dive right into the topic of brainwashing in ballet culture. First, I want to mention that not all of the points I'm going to be discussing are a result of actual brainwashing. Most of these are a result of strong cultural conditioning. There is a difference that I will break down. However, real brainwashing does happen in some studio or company environments. So I'm going to make sure you know the difference so that you can use your own critical thinking skills to determine the next best steps for you. So often we can be entrenched in these particular small environments where we have a class size of maybe, let's say, 15 other dancers, and we see them every day. You have created a small little world for yourself. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you just need to be aware of the fact that when ballet and like a certain environment becomes your whole world, basically, you're much more likely to think that certain behaviors or beliefs are very normal where they might not be. So, what is cultural conditioning? Cultural conditioning is really a process in which authority figures around you, it could be your parents, your teachers, even some peers you look up to, define your values, your beliefs, your behaviors, and even the lens through which you see the world. The difference between cultural conditioning and brainwashing is that cultural conditioning is more of just a natural process of being entrenched in a certain social situation in which certain behaviors are very prevalent, beliefs are prevalent, and so you kind of just slowly adapt into your environment. That's a big part of cultural conditioning. Now, brainwashing is when you'll have a more radical shift in your beliefs and behaviors that is more, it comes more from coercion. So you're kind of forced to adopt these things. So cultural conditioning is the social process in which authority figures such as parents, teachers, peers, and the media define our cultural values, our beliefs, ethical systems, and ultimately the way we perceive ourselves in the world. So an example of this is if you grew up in a studio in which almost all your peers and teachers heavily emphasize the importance of pursuing a professional career in dance. You might think it's perfectly normal to love dance and therefore it's natural to go into being a professional or pursue a professional career. Whereas if you grew up in another studio where no one was pursuing a professional career, but everybody loved dance, you might think, oh, I love dance. Why would I bother trying to make it my career? That would be too hard, you know? So these are two different examples of how the culture of one studio conditioned you to think a certain way and another conditioned you in another way. So it's important to step back and realize how you're conditioned. Now for real brainwashing. Brainwashing is the process of pressuring someone into adopting radically different beliefs by using systematic or often forcible terms. I know for me that I have personally been in environments in a ballet school where real brainwashing was happening. And it actually took many years, and I wish I got more therapy, quite frankly. I didn't. I only went to 3 sessions, but it took a lot of work to start to undo this. So here are some traits of real brainwashing. Social and physical isolation are a factor of brainwashing. So you might be completely removed from the outside world or even your family. Usually having deprivation of some kind is a really crucial factor in brainwashing someone. You could be deprived of sleep. You could be deprived of nourishment. If you're constantly being overworked and your ballet school is not letting you rest, that might naturally make you more susceptible to brainwashing, even if that's like, guys, I want to make clear, it doesn't matter if it's someone's intention to brainwash you or not. Brainwashing is happening. The next thing is that brainwashing, the process usually includes promoting a very strong us versus them mentality. The next is having total dependency on a leader for guidance and even fulfillment of basic human needs. So I wouldn't say that in ballet culture it's common for a certain teacher to be like the only source of some basic human needs like water and food, but you will see behaviors like if you don't stay in this school one more year, you won't get the training you need to be a professional. And if you're not a professional, all of your training was a waste and you're a failure. You know, these very strong terms and conditions that keep someone in fear just enough to control their behavior. These last 3 I'm really passionate about uncovering, which are first, having frequent attacks on your self-esteem. That is a major behavioral trait of leaders that brainwash their subjects. They will frequently attack the subject's self-esteem until the subject feels so ripped bare that the only self-esteem that they can get is by seeking the approval of the leader. That totally happens in some training environments or professional environments. The next thing is blind obedience is a big part of brainwashing. So if a teacher is saying things like, just do this because I said so, basically the teacher is beyond being questioned. They're beyond explaining themselves. They'll just yell and say, do this, and the students or dancers are just supposed to do it. And lastly, testing is a part of brainwashing. What testing is basically when the leader gives a test or a task to their subject, let's say it's a dancer, to challenge their obedience and allegiance to that leader. So here are some ways that these multiple traits show up in ballet culture. The first are, like I mentioned, frequent attacks on a dancer's self-esteem. And this is probably the most common trait, even if it's like the only one you're experiencing in your environment. It is sadly very normal for teachers to use shame as a method to control a dancer. If you can make a dancer feel enough shame to where they feel so alone, you will eventually become the only voice they listen to. If you belittle a dancer or a person enough, you could get them into such a vulnerable state where the next thing you say, like, here's what you're going to do about it, dancer, can feel to the dancer like that's the only option for moving forward. You tell me I'm terrible. You tell me I'm incompetent. I'm dumb. And if you get belittled to that point, usually the next thing the teacher says, like, okay, so then the next time you just don't mess up. Stay for 30 minutes after class to keep practicing, whatever. Or you just need to lose weight. That'll make you feel better. You're going to be more inclined as a dancer to listen to that solution. That's definitely a form of brainwashing, in my opinion. The next way that brainwashing shows up in ballet culture is there can be very often an encouragement to completely forgo having a normal, healthy social life or any sort of life outside of ballet. This definitely showed up a lot in older generations of dancers. So, well, not even that long ago, it was unthinkable for a ballet dancer to get married. Now we think, oh, it's still it's becoming more normal to have children. That's awesome. But even so, a lot of dancers worry that having a child is the end of their careers. But not even that long ago, you don't get married, you don't eat anything fried, your whole life is ballet, you don't go to college. Like, there were so many exclusions in the life of a dancer where you just weren't allowed to participate in normal things. Here's another really big way that brainwashing shows up. If you are in an environment where any sort of questioning or just asking a question for clarification or any sort of question you might want to ask the teacher to help you be a better dancer, if your questions are seen as a sign of stupidity or some sort of character flaw, like what you weren't smart enough to figure it out on your own, that is a sign of a really destructive behavior, and some brainwashing might be going on there. Because if you get to the point where you don't want to ask any questions because asking questions is equated with you being stupid, that teacher won't be likely held accountable for what they're saying, or what they're saying might not be questioned. You're not encouraged to bring your own ideas into the equation, and that's pretty dangerous. And here's an example of that us versus them mentality I just talked about. In particularly some very serious training environments, teachers can create this culture where they might smack talk or put down either non-dancers or dancers of different training backgrounds or skill levels or appearances. so that they can bolster the morale of their group of dancers. So they might say something like, at least we're way better than that group of dancers over there. Or like, if you're Russian trained, there's no other way of training. Have you seen Balanchine trained dancers? It's ridiculous what they do. That's an example of setting up this us versus them mentality that kind of makes you think like, oh, you're in the in crowd and anyone outside of that is inferior. So you want to stay conforming to this in crowd so that you can stay in that approval. Teachers or directors of schools or even peers can start to mistreat or kind of place as an outcast any dancer who is not up to par in their skill level, like maybe they're at the bottom of the class or the company, any dancer who is injured, or any dancer who has gained weight. This is very common for dancers who are in those situations to be seen as an outcast, or they're mistreated compared to the rest of the group because they don't accurately represent the ideal image of the ballet company or school they're a part of. I know for me, I was treated like this when I kind of came from being a good student. I was in great standing with my ballet teachers, and then suddenly when I got injured, I started to be seen as like the outcast a little bit, to the point where I was afraid to ask for a letter of recommendation because I was pretty sure they wouldn't give it to me since I was injured, and therefore if I auditioned under the name of the school, I wouldn't be up to par, or they wouldn't want to have their name on my leotard, you know. So now I want to move into talking about some ways that cultural conditioning and brainwashing might have affected you, and I'll bring up some tips along the way about how to begin challenging this mentality and hopefully healing from it. So the first way this might have affected you is you might have a very low self-esteem, because when you make a mistake or when you show any sort of imperfection, you've learned to equate those things with a lack of personal value or a flaw in your character, like you just haven't tried hard enough, you're just not smart enough, you're just not talented enough. If you've started to equate those things, or those things come into your mind when you make a mistake, you might have been conditioned in a way that's not very healthy. And this is really where I want to stop and say that what you do and what you achieve does not in any way, or at least it does not accurately represent your identity or your value as a human being. Who you are, conversely, is really better represented by a mixture of your unique gifts, your values, your passions, the things that frustrate you, your sense of purpose in life, and your personality. And there are so many different aspects that make up really who you are. And identity is really something that's not super easy to grasp, hence why a lot of us take years and years and years / our whole lives to like really figure it out. Those are really things that better encapsulate who you are, not what you do. The next thing I'll mention is really a strength and a weakness in dancers, which is that we can have super high standards for ourselves. And we can start to think that these high standards are actually just normal standards. So we could be chasing this fulfillment of this super high standard of like maybe even perfection that's not really possible. It's not that attainable, you know, healthy, and it's not that normal. We just think it is because a lot of dancers around us have these high standards. And here are some high standards I want to mention, which is you might start to equate having very, very low body fat as just being healthy and beautiful, when it's not necessarily, it might not be healthy for you. You might think things like your torso is too long and your legs are too short, and you might spend a lot of time worrying about that when it's really nothing you can do anything about. You might also think that you need to go to specific summer programs or have a certain resume or career track in order to be successful or to be on the track to success. Whereas some of these options, like going to certain summer programs, might not be the best option for you. Maybe you would be better suited to a smaller program that's easier to get into, but you're going to get a lot more individual attention there. The next thing is that for many dancers, we're kind of conditioned to value conformity. So conforming to look like the group. And in many ways, we focus on our mistakes and how we're like not as good as everyone else as a dancer. And we might think that's a good thing. Like we need to know what our flaws are so we can work on them. Sure. But on the other side of the token, you can really start to lose your individual strengths. You can lose your sense of individuality. When you're like so focused on conforming to the group and being like one of the best of the group, you're still focused on looking like the group, which can negate a very healthy and helpful process of learning who you are. What do you bring to the table? What do you like about your dancing? If you're going to be putting yourself out there in auditions and getting a job, like you need to know how you're an individual in order to really stand out. As dancers, we can also be conditioned to kind of forget that we have the power to make decisions for ourselves. We are allowed to have different opinions. We are allowed to disagree with a teacher. Maybe it's not like verbally disagreeing and saying like, I disagree with you. That's probably not really going to happen. But you might be so conditioned to like just constantly think your teachers are right, like they have the right ideas and you don't. And by just automatically agreeing with everything they say, you could really be at risk for forgetting that you have the power to disagree with them if they're saying something about you that's unhealthy and damaging to your self-esteem. We can also be so conditioned to just be like machines, like disciplined machines, that we are always speaking in terms of, I need to do this, I should do this, I have to do this. And it can get to a point, like I have worked through this in a lot of my mindset coaching clients. I'm working through this with them. Like you can forget what you want. Like what do you want to do? How do you want to enjoy yourself in ballet and out of ballet? When you're just so conditioned to always focusing on what you should do, what you have to do, what you need to do, without questioning it and saying like, says who? Why do I have to do this? Like, is that really the best thing for me to do right now? If you don't stop to question why you're doing what you're doing, and if you don't acknowledge that you have a choice in everything you do, you might think you don't, but you really do. You're deciding to do it or not. And it might be the easiest, most beneficial thing to do what your teachers tell you to do. But sometimes it's not. You need to kind of question when you keep telling yourself, I have to do this, I have to do that. Question that insane discipline sometimes and make sure you're using it in a healthy way and that you're also able to get in touch with what you want to do, because that's a really great thing to tap into when you're making artistic choices in your dancing. You need to know how you love to dance. And then when you're outside of ballet, instead of just focusing on like, I have to cross train now and I have to do this and I have to eat healthy, what do you want to do? How do you want to be spending your time? That will also help you to get to know yourself better. And here's one of my last points, which is that you can be conditioned to think that success looks like a very specific thing. It looks like getting into a company, looking a certain way, winning ballet competitions. And you could start to think that just because that is success, if you achieve those things, you will be happy. That's not necessarily true. When you achieve those things, you might have to sacrifice so much to get to that point. And then if you do achieve it in the end, you might recognize that it only makes you happy for 5 minutes, and then you're thinking about the next goal that you need to achieve to be happy. And so it's a really dangerous hamster wheel that we can jump on as dancers. You need to be careful to get your fulfillment from more than just your achievements. Life is about more than just achieving success. And you need to know what success means for you, not for somebody else. You can also be conditioned to react a certain way to your mistakes. An example of this is when you fall out of a pirouette, your whole life you might have seen dancers around you like outwardly getting frustrated with themselves whenever they do that. And so then that might just be a normal programmed response for you. And so then when you fall out of a pirouette, you might just get really angry and frustrated with yourself. And you might be shocked to learn that a lot of our responses as humans are conditioned. They are learned. They're not necessarily inherent. So watch out for how you've learned to respond to certain things in your dancing and start to question that. Maybe you could laugh at yourself when you make a mistake instead of getting angry. So here are some tips to round out this discussion. So first is that you need to know that once you are aware of what's going on, well, especially when you're aware, the power of choice is 100% in your hands. You can choose if you want to conform to it or not. Even if you do decide to stay in your ballet school, that might be a really unhealthy environment for you. You don't have to stay. You might think you do. You don't have to. You're doing it by choice. Or if you do agree with something a teacher says that's kind of destructive, you're doing it by choice. And just by recognizing that that's in your power and that's your responsibility to choose, whether you choose to defy what's going on or play along with it, I think it's kind of empowering to know that it's your choice. Next thing is question who says these behaviors and beliefs are good and why do they say that? Where did you get these ideas from? If you notice that you can't back up an idea with logic or identify a real benefit of it, you might want to let it go. The next thing is if you are going to participate in some things that you're conditioned to do or believe, that's totally fine. That's normal. Just recognize it is your choice and contemplate what your personal reasons are for doing so. Contemplate not only the cost of making that decision, but also why it might be worth it for you. Now I'm going to round us off with some positive ways that you might have been conditioned. So many dancers have a very strong connection in their minds between discomfort and enduring through it for the sake of personal growth. That is a really key behavior in creating personal success. If you are only interested in living a very comfortable life, you probably won't stretch yourself and fulfill your potential. The next thing is that many of us are very used to working hard over a long time in order to achieve a distant, far off goal. Having that sort of perseverance and endurance is really significant. Next, many of us learn to be very teachable and correctable. We don't always assume that we're right, and that allows us to always be searching for how we can be better. And I'd say in most cases that can be used as a massive personal strength. Next, many of us are conditioned to be pretty self-aware, spatially aware, and aware of our bodies. Not only that, we're also aware of how we come off to other people. We're sensitive to that. Next is that we learn to perform in whatever we do. We do learn to care a little bit about how we come off and what other people think and how we're presenting ourselves. And obviously that can be a little bit unhealthy, but it can also be productive. Like, I'm not one of those people who's like, never care what people think. There's a reason why instinctually us humans care what other people think. Like, there is a purpose, there is a point. And if you're always like, I don't care what other people think, you might be isolating yourself and you might also be a little bit egotistical. That's just my opinion, my hot take. Okay, hot take over. The last thing is that we aren't most of the time afraid to dream big and work hard. We aren't afraid to do hard things because in ballet, doing hard things is pretty normal. So I know this has been a pretty long video. If you've made it to this point, thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear in the comments how you think that cultural conditioning and brainwashing has kind of played a role in your journey. I'd love to hear kind of the negatives and the positives. How has that affected you negatively? And how have you been kind of positively conditioned or brainwashed a little bit? I would love to hear in the comments. Other than that, do make sure that you click the link below to download my free PDF guide outlining 5 common mistakes that dancers make in injury recovery and how to avoid them. And other than that, that's it. I will see you next week. Bye.